Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, we got a very special guest. Very excited to have him on. We have Richard Kaczynski. But before we get to him, we will introduce the other rejects we got on the show. And today we got joining with us, we got the lovely Lisa, the Occult Reject, a mad scientist. What is going on, Lisa? How are you?
Good. Thank you. Good morning here, at least. Thank you, Nick, for inviting me, and looking forward to Dr. Kaczynski's talk today, and to also discussing it with Robbie and Jen as well. Thank you. And the only thing I'd like to plug is the occultresearchinstitute.org. Check us out.
Awesome. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate you joining us with us. And we got my man, Jin the Ninja. What is going on, sir? How are you?
What's up, boss? Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Lisa and Robbie, and of course, Dr. Kaczynski. I'm quite excited for this. I'm not a Thelemite, despite the rumors, but I'm quite interested in the neo-Gnosticism, like the broader cosmology and maybe even ontological perspectives within it. And so if you want to check me out, you can follow me at Wukong Reborn, WKONG Reborn, or at Threshold Saints, which is the show account on both Twitter and IG, as well as The True Grey Lodge with a V, thetruegraylodge.com, where you can find us. We're doing a Friday night Gnostic book club tonight instead of Gnostic Mass. So we are reading Kenneth Grant's Night Side of Eden,
awesome.
Part 1. So yeah, check that out if you're interested. And then thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I like how you're like, I'm not into like really Thelema, but we're talking about Kenneth Grant tonight. Nice. That really helped, Jim. All right. Thank you very much for coming on, sir. I really do mean it. I always like your input and your questions. And we got the man himself, the storyteller, Robbie Marks. What is going on, sir? How are you?
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody today. I'm glad to be on with such a good crew and excited to hear what Richard has to say and where we go. My name is Robbie or Robert Marks, and I'm an artist, illustrator. I'm working on a book right now. But yeah, if you want to check out my various projects and works, you can go to my Linktree, which is Linktree RMARX, and that'll pull up everything for you. And yeah, thanks for having me on, Nick.
Oh, of course, Robbie. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you made it. And finally, to the guest himself, we got Richard Kaczynski. He's a scholar and psychologist. He's got a PhD in social psychology, and he is a student of Thelema since the late 1970s. He's an OTO contributor, editor, and lecturer on Magick. And today we will be talking about Mind Over Magic, the psychology of ritual magic, which is one of his newer books. And again, very excited to have you on. And please, Richard, anything that I left out, let people know what you want them to know about you and where they can find any of your amazing work.
All right. Well, I'm perhaps best known as the author of the biography of Aleister Crowley called Perdurabo, The Life of Aleister Crowley. And I've also written various other books on Western esotericism, including books like Forgotten Templars, The Unknown Origins of Ordo Templi Orientis, which is a deep dive into the odd byways of Masonic history and how all of that fed into OTO, as well as books like The Wise or Concise Guide to Aleister Crowley, and recently the critical edition of Aleister Crowley's early work, The Sword of Song, which has been put out in a deluxe edition by Near Traditions, who also are the publisher of my newest book, Mind Over Magic, as you mentioned, which hits the stores on October 7th. So I hope you're all inspired to check that out when it comes out.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Fun fact, and it's almost embarrassing to mention, but I did read your book on Aleister Crowley in prison. I came across that in prison and read it in there. So very good work.
Thank you. It's a lot of reading. So hopefully you had the spare time to dig into it.
Yeah, you'd be actually surprised how much Thelemic stuff was in the house. Wow, there's a lot here. Yeah. It was interesting enough. So yeah, Mind Over Magic. Well, first, actually, if you don't mind, what even got you into the occult world? How did you even start off with that, and how did you end up getting into the OTO? If you don't mind me asking.
Well, as far as the occult world goes, I think there was just something about, there's like this perfect storm of who I am and the times I grew up in, because at the time I was growing up, I remember as a very small child is loving Star Trek, and then Leonard Nimoy wound up hosting this TV show called In Search Of, which is like this weekly show that investigated the weird and the unexplained, from Bigfoot to ESP. And I, as a Trekkie, of course, had to watch this. But there were like movies coming out, like those Mysterious Monsters, and you could literally go into the grocery store. The one by my house, had like the Man, Myth, and Magic magazine that came out, and I actually one week had my mom buy me The Techniques of High Magic by Francis King and Stephen Skinner. So it was just like everywhere. One of my favorite memories is that living in Detroit, where I grew up, we were close enough to Windsor to get Canadian television, and they had a game show called Beyond Reason, and it was kind of like a metaphysical What's My Line. They had 3 people in soundproof booths, and they would bring in a special guest who would be out of sight, and the 3 panelists would have 60 seconds to ask questions. One was a psychic, so they had some personal item of the guest. One was an astrologer who had the birth chart, and one was a palm reader who had a photo of the person's hand. And so they had 60 seconds to ask their questions and guess who the guest was. And as you can imagine, sometimes it was uncanny, sometimes it was just off, left field, and they weren't even close. But one thing I remember very clearly is this one time the astrologer was looking at this person's chart and saying, and this had nothing to do with why they were famous, but saying, "Oh, I see you had an accident involving falling off a horse." And you're seeing like, a split camera thing, the panelists going, "Wow, yeah. And you were about 14 years old at the time, and and you broke your arm." And this person's like going like, "How did you know that?" So it was always a lot of fun to tune in and check this stuff out. But again, this kind of stuff was just everywhere when I grew up, and it just fascinated me. And again, obviously everyone who grew up at the same time as me did not, glom onto this stuff the way that I did, but it was just, I just kind of felt like all those things in the culture at that time just kind of funneled me into this direction. And one day I discovered there was a metaphysical bookshop. So I got on my bicycle and pedaled 5 miles to the store, and got to know the owner, and I picked up a copy of Israel Regardie's The Golden Dawn. And when I came back 2 weeks later, he said, "Oh, did you like that? If you did, you might be interested in this." And he pulled out Aleister Crowley's Magic and Theory and Practice.
Oh,
and,
good choice.
Again, I'm this 14-year-old kid reading this going, I don't know what this means, but I'm going to figure
did
it
you
out.
even understand that at 14? I can't. No.
No. Well, the thing was, there's this end where he like signs with all his magical mottos and grade symbols and all of that. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but it was like a puzzle at that point. It was a challenge. It's like, I'm going to figure this out. And, it's been going in that direction ever since.
Nice. It's kind of interesting. Like you're saying though, at the time you grew up, I even feel like that with like even most of the people on this panel all around the same age. I feel like the time that we grew up, there was like something, I don't know if there was like people are having their own magical experiences and they were creating and putting magic out there themselves. But it's like, I feel like certain times there's certain things going on that like maybe us as kids, there was something in the air that we caught on to, and it just made us like search for something. We felt that magic, but what is it?
And yeah, I mean, there were just like dozens and dozens of like UFO books that you could pick up, and just Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision, and just all kinds of stuff is these mass market paperbacks.
Yeah, I just as a kid, like paranormal got bigger again. UFOs, horror was huge. You just had all these different like to a child. It's just like it's a playground of imagination.
Well, and when I was in, I don't know, 4th or 5th grade at the Scholastic Book Fair, sponsored by the school, I got one of those books, and in it was talking about the men in black from inside the hollow earth that would come up and watch people. And, so it's like and then you got the Twilight Zones and the weird, it's just proliferated. It was everywhere, Yeah.
Yeah, I remember picking up from the Scholastic Book Fair some book like
So
22 Strange and Amazing Stories.
Yeah.
Talk about it like a woman who fell out of an airplane and survived, and the strange parallels between John F. Kennedy and Abraham Lincoln's, lives and deaths, and again the Loch Ness Monster and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And again, Scholastic Book Fair.
And it made the world magical, and you wanted to seek out what this strange kind of thing was subsiding in this reality.
Absolutely. I think I had this feeling as a kid that, we had done the moon landing, we were sending, the first Voyager satellite out into space, and, we had mapped the Earth. So pretty much, and, science was doing all these amazing things. So it seemed like science had discovered everything there was about the world around us. And of course that wasn't true, but kind of as a kid, it kind of felt that way because there was just this amazing world of science. But then when you start talking about these mysterious things, what are these UFO things, or what is the astral plane, and what is this magic stuff? It suddenly becomes this uncharted territory. And that was also very exciting and enticing.
Right.
That's awesome. I like that. I've gone the Scholastic. I had totally forgot all about that. You just took it back. It's funny. A couple of weeks ago, I saw a meme about like that, and it was like, like $2 in the Scholastic Book Day was like, and your life was set. Like that's how.
Yeah.
Give me
I've
$2.
also got to this. I've also got to this day, like the Golden Book of Hallucinogenic Plants, which just blows my mind for that exists.
That is awesome. All right, so how about if you don't mind, before we get into the book, how long have you been like, I guess, into you are a member, I was of the OTO, correct? Still?
Yeah, I was kind of like a corresponding member, a pre-initiate member since about 1986, and then I actually initiated in San Francisco in 1988, and been a member ever since.
Oh, nice. Okay, all right. So that's been a minute. Yeah. And I see. I had watched one of your interviews recently with David Shoemaker. That was awesome. Yeah. He's a
good friend.
Person I think has Living Thelema. I think that's an amazing book, actually. Yeah. I listened to all his podcasts on that stuff back in the day and everything. But all right, back to you. This book. What was the reason you put this out? What did you think other books were lacking, and this is why you felt the urge to put this out?
If that's the thing to me, a topic that people hadn't actually tackled. A lot of times when people talk about psychology and magic, they tend to get into a lot of theoretical stuff that's kind of unprovable. I mean, like, for example, Carl Jung is amazing in terms of a model of how the mind works, and it's a great therapeutic model for dealing with patients in therapy, but none of its assumptions are testable using modern science. It's one of these, it's just kind of like a model that you work with and you get the results, but with your patient population, but you can't test it in a scientific way. And other books on the topic tend to go off into quantum mechanics and things like that, which again is interesting, but if you actually talk to a physicist, most of them are going to say, yeah, that's not really how it works. And I don't mean to dismiss either of those approaches, but I wanted, my background is in social psychology. It's very much geared to scientific research and statistical analysis. And I wanted to bring in actual hard data, hard research that pertained to magic. And while there aren't people out there doing research where they are doing like real-time brain imaging of someone while they're doing a magic ritual, banishing or something like that, there's a lot of research in psychology about things that those personality traits and effects of our environment around us and so on that apply to what magicians do. And by magician, I use that term very broadly, anyone who engages in any kind of spiritual practice. So I don't mean to exclude people who might call themselves a Wiccan instead of a magician or whatever. I mean, those people are all doing magic, and so I'm using this in a very broad and inclusive way.
I use the magician the same way. I feel like it just includes everybody. No, I think that's great though. And that's one thing that I thought was like impressive about having you on. And I think I guess Shoemaker would be the same thing, but there's not too many people, in my opinion, that are actually trying to bring like academic science into a cult, or not enough, I don't think. And I think there is a lot. I think if occultists and scientists were to maybe just put their differences aside and actually talk to each other, they'd make so much progress.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Like another thing that a lot of the people who write on magic and psychology do is they'll lean into parapsychology research, which is fascinating, and I'm very intrigued by that. But I also get this feeling that once you start talking about that, there's like a whole swath of people who automatically dismiss that because they're skeptics and they don't accept the possibility that that stuff could exist. And so another part of my rationale with this book was, no, I want to focus on solid peer-reviewed research about psychology, not psychological theories or models, not necessarily parapsychology. And there's plenty of books about that stuff that people can go and read if they want to pursue those avenues. But I had like a very specific focus on evidence-based approaches that and maybe naive, but hopefully not, that would allow that reaching across the aisle for practitioners and scientists to actually find that common ground.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think it's interesting when you look at the idea of science versus the paranormal, getting into all the quote unquote woo woo. It's like science, the way it's set up, it's only able to test certain means that are repeatable within the physical matrix. Anything beyond that becomes mental, that becomes vibration, that becomes higher forms of etheric it just doesn't have the tools. So it becomes the individual body and the repeatable phenomena and these things so can you kind of get into some of these ways that we can with repeatable means be able to kind of draw out some of these higher kind of forms that are above and beyond the physical matrix?
Yeah, actually, what we were saying reminded me of a couple of interesting things. One of which is this idea of repeatability. Right. And Dean Radin, in his early book, The Conscious Universe, kind of talks about this. Dean Radin is a parapsychologist, but he talks about how this issue that scientists, particularly skeptical scientists, expect certain phenomenon to be repeated and replicated in the lab 100% of the time, with high degree of reliability. And he points out that we will pay someone millions of dollars who can hit a ball with a stick one time out of three. And so this idea that we can accept the idea that a baseball player is not perfect, but can accept the idea that some of these states of consciousness that happen don't necessarily happen on demand in a laboratory setting. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think while talking, I lost track of what you were asking.
Well, just in regard to how do we test these outer limits?
Yeah,
and,
okay.
And be able to have verifiable kind of for those that refuse to believe in these further kind of proceedings.
Right. Well, I'm reminded of I believe this is Bill Moyers. He was the guy that ran that series, on Myth with Joseph Campbell. But I think he had like a separate series. But I remember him in his show coming up with this example about how a dog's nose is an amazing device. I mean, it can smell. Also, it can smell the scent of its owners. It can go out and sniff hydrants and things like that and tell who's been there before. And through that mechanism, a dog can learn a lot about the world. But Bill Moyer says, that the sniff test is not a way of finding out about God. And in the same way, You could say that science is good at a lot of things, but there are certain things that it's not good at.
Right.
And you got to use the right tool for the right job. And for me and my approach to this book, I'm not, again, trying to explain everything that happens to people when they're doing magic, whatever that practice may be, as all psychology. It's, I think Aleister Crowley talks about magic being the art and science of causing change to occur in conformity with will. So science is only part of that. There's also an art.
Right. Exactly.
And so my approach is kind of like, okay, let's talk about the science part, but there's also a thing that we really can't talk about in science. There's that subjective, unique experience that people will have, and that's kind of in another realm, and I'll allow people to interpret that as they will. But one of the things I do in Mind Over Magic is in the last chapter, I try to take, a semester course on research design methodology and pack it into one kind of short chapter about what is the scientific method, how can you test your own magical work for yourself. So if you were doing some, magical operation for this outcome, you kind of walk through the steps of how you would develop a hypothesis, how you might go about collecting your data, how you might control for other things, and how you can critically evaluate whether your experiment worked or not. And that, I think, arms readers with a toolbox to try to apply this method to their spiritual work. Because some of this process may be this trial and error of finding a system that works for you. And again, you can't tell what works for you unless you can tell what works.
Right. But there are common repeatable phenomena that are occurrences. Otherwise, this whole idea of magic or the magi or going back into all these ancient practices, it wouldn't have persisted and risen and come about, because there are common repeatable, people get an effect when they participate.
Yeah, that's the whole
idea, yeah.
line of a lot of these schools. They'll say, hey, here's these techniques, here's these tools you can use. Do this lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, or do this, calling of the watchtowers or what have you. And or even let's do this, Catholic Mass,
Right.
And transubstantiate.
I like it. One thing I did want to ask you about, just real quick, and it's kind of, I guess, like a random question. I tried to ask some people that are into Thelema or Crowley, and this question, if I can, you mentioned science, so I'm going to try to throw it in this way. And this might sound off the wall, but it's just my belief. It's a theory of mine. Do you think at any point Aleister Crowley actually points at the eyeballs in the brain in some of his stuff?
I'm not sure I follow.
That doesn't. Yeah, no, I actually think there's certain times where he does actually depict the function, what your eyeball in the brain,
physical phenomena.
Yeah, during a magical experience. That's just my theory. I was just wondering, since you mentioned science, if you ever come across that.
Sounds like in his artwork, or
yeah, artwork, or just even ways of expressing certain things in archetypes. I do think he might be expressing the pupil dilating and changing inside the eye, and how the light goes up into the brain through the optic nerve. As crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's a couple of people who have explored Crowley's writings from the angle of psychedelics. And I find that to be kind of interesting because Crowley did use psychedelics. He didn't necessarily say, "Hey, I was tripping balls when I did this, that, or the other thing," but there's other places where he does say that. But there people who've had these experiences kind of read some of his stuff, like the vision and the voice, and say, "Wow, that stuff really sounds very much like a classic, psychedelic experience." And I think that's very fascinating, because we all can come at any bit of data from different angles, and approaching Crowley from the angle of psychedelics isn't necessarily something I would half
never
thought.
actually
I was kind of sticking to the facts, but having someone who was knowledgeable in this to kind of take this apart and go, no, this is actually very classic stuff. Is a neat theory, It's so it's interesting to hear these different takes.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to throw like a weird one at you there. I was just
I'm gonna piggyback on Nick's stuff because I did a little bit of a study on the vision and the voice, and some of his writing is very analogous to physiology of anatomy as well as brain anatomy, and that it all functions together. And even when you start to dissect some of the numerology that he hints to, you look at some of the development, fetal, embryonic with eye physiology, brain physiology, and it almost mirrors it. And so it's almost like you almost wonder, did he take a crash course in physiology, embryology, and eye anatomy, brain anatomy, because it mirrors it a lot. And so I think there's almost a pause to wonder, maybe he was a secret anatomist or a secret physiologist.
Yeah, I mean, not to my knowledge, Crowley was a voracious reader, but when he went to university, he was going to study for the diplomatic service, but then kind of focused mostly in like the humanities. His mentor was a Greek, literature professor, Arthur Wolgar Verrill, and so while he may have had some courses, that wasn't really the focus of his education. Again, Crowley read a lot, and I think there is a lot of mysticism connected with sensory input. I mean, I think of like Goethe's writing about color theory and things like that, but Goethe was also very much of a mystic as well.
Yeah.
And so I think there is a strand of that in Western esotericism.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, Crowley, back to Richard. All right, so it is his time. With your book, do you go into, I could be making a stretch, but do you happen to go into like maybe the psychology behind like maybe like the whole robes, investments, and all the stuff you use on your altar? Is there anything?
Absolutely. Just to give you a couple of examples, there is a lot of research done in, believe it or not, marketing psychology that talks about how our identity and our personality is wrapped up in our possessions. And so the things that we own are in a way extensions of ourselves. And that absolutely applies to, a magician. If you think about like the magician in the tarot, he has, the four weapons, the suits of the tarot on his altar, the disc, the wand, the cup, and the dagger. And in ceremonial traditions, these things are like the dagger is, the cutting incisiveness of your mind, and the wand is the force of will, and the cup is the seat of emotions, and so on. And so these are literally meant to be external representations of our state of mind, and marketing psychology of all things kind of confirms that is in fact how we treat our possessions. And so if we have these special magical items that we have consecrated and treat with reverence, that's going to that assertion in magical spaces is absolutely true. Similarly, there are studies in psychology that deal with how we dress and how that affects our state of mind. I wanted to include in the book a picture from an old Bugs Bunny cartoon, but I couldn't get the permission. I'm really sad about that. But there's this old Bugs Bunny cartoon called Bugs's Bonnets. And in this episode, it's set up like a mock, psychology documentary. And what happens is this truck with a hat shop is going down the road, and it hits a bump, and the back of the truck opens up, and all these hats go floating out. And as they land on Bugs Bunny's head or Elmer Fudd's head, they take on the personality associated with the hat, which I think is pretty funny. But there's actually something to that. Psychologists have done studies in clothing, being in a room with a lab coat, can affect how you respond to your environment, these environmental cues. But more than that, putting on the lab coat will actually make the person, will change their state of mind, will actually make them smarter, and change their personality subtly. So there are studies that have compared, where people are at before they put on this lab coat and afterwards. If you put on glasses, people feel smarter.
Right.
And so this is a repeatable and demonstrable psychological phenomenon. So if those things again change your consciousness or even your ability, your actual intelligence is boosted a little bit. Again, doing this in a very meaningful sort of way, not in some abstract psychological study, but in a temple where you're putting on a special consecrated robe, or if your practice is skyclad, if you're removing all your mundane clothes and going into this sacred sort of space, that will also change your state of mind. And I think the idea here is that these things don't make the magic happen, but they alter your consciousness, and it's that altered consciousness that allows the magic, the personal transformation to occur.
And I would think also is a part of the magic, just in the sense of, because you are essentially working to change your consciousness, elevate, enter into states of samadhi. You're seeking certain mental states in a lot of these cases, to participate, and then you add the sympathetic magic on top of that, and it compiles essentially.
Yeah, and actually in the book I do talk a little bit about the psychology of being like in the zone, as they call it, and how this is something that's really hard to just, I'm going to go into the zone. It doesn't work that way, but that research has shown that there's ways, again, of training yourself to more readily go into that space where everything just kind of flows naturally, whether you're a musician or an athlete or whatever. Again, most of these studies aren't focused on magicians, but the flow state certainly does apply.
Right.
And the lessons learned where like athletes can train themselves to get into the flow state, literally the exercises they talk about are like straight out of the basics of ceremonial magic practice. Keep a diary, meditate, it's pretty uncanny to read the recommendations in sports medicine for getting into the zone. And I do kind of think that one of the things that with the mechanisms, and this again my own personal theory of the mechanisms of ritual, is that practitioners spend a lot of time learning these elaborate correspondences, these colors represent this characteristic, this astrological sign, this planetary ruler, these Greek gods, Roman gods, Egyptian gods, what have you, the whatever pantheon you subscribe to. There's all these things that kind of all interlock and correspond, scents and colors and sounds.
777.
And so that when you're in ritual, you're engaging all of those senses and kind of tying up, your rational thinky bits, but there's that other part of your mind, though, that kind of clears the field. It's like, oh, I'm busy thinking about all these correspondences, and your intuitive part doesn't really care about that. Kind of stuff can kind of bubble to the surface.
Yeah. Do you think the incense might even be helping with memories, or smell can actually really affect the mind?
Yeah. They say that smell is actually the most potent memory trigger.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of this process as well, because you are, through your practice and through like memorizing these correspondences, you are in fact training, these associations over a long period of time, so that when you finally do encounter them in ritual or in ceremony, that again they're triggering these memories or these responses that you have been kind of coding into yourself, over weeks, months, years.
Yeah, because I know recently I was doing stuff on Giordano Bruno, if I remember correctly. I think he's a Gnostic saint.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got what the memory of art and of the
The
art of
memory
memory.
fallacy.
Yeah, and all those. He was heavy into the idea of memory.
Yeah.
That wheel he had and everything. I was like, I got to get my hands on that. Yeah. So I was just wondering if incense, because of the whole.
Well,
part.
and I think incense also, when you look at incense, there's certain chemical compounds that are in different incenses that have a tendency to affect different neuroreceptors. Like, what is it? Frankincense actually has cannabinoids in it. So when they're burning that at the church and the people are, inhaling that, they're getting a subtle dose of a mild cannabinoid that affects the mind state. So there are things, physical as far as the smell, but also physiological as far as the system itself.
Yeah. Actually, this is a really good question for one of the studies some of the studies I look at in the book, is that people have tried to look at incense and how they'd affect people's moods or state of mind. And one of the problems that researchers have run into is that there are so many different kinds of incense,
right,
that you can't systematically make a general statement about all of them. And even if you say something like sandalwood, there are so many different varieties and formulations of sandalwood incense, and identifying what that active ingredient might be, and again, these studies have found that, certain scents are associated with certain sorts of emotional or reactions, but at the same time, I recognize it's very limited, because the number of possibilities and combinations is just off the charts.
That is true. Yeah, I've actually mind fucked sandalwood before. I understand how many different variations there is. Yeah, I looked into getting. I was like, well, which one should I be using? If I don't use the right one, this isn't going to work. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting about the whole. I think there's a lot of with the mind connections and memories within the ritual garbs and the robes and all that stuff.
There is sorry, Nick, I just want to jump in and say one thing really quickly, is that there is an interesting idea in Tantra that you actually use those things. So exactly like what all of you are talking about, you use those things, but then you let them go. Sort of return to sort of that Rigpa state, that sort of fifth primordial consciousness, that flow state maybe, but without sort of it's like more nebulous than intention. It's more nebulous than will. There's it's more it's like that waking consciousness from dreaming consciousness. So you're not necessarily doing anything, but you're just really in that. You could say Dathic consciousness, almost like you're just in true knowledge. So I do think it's interesting about the incense, though, because that is clearly true. Like the amount of compounding in Tantra specifically, but also in all esoteric traditions. I think plants are, well, many people say that plants are actually our closest relatives. So I've heard a lot of, people talking about like geontologies in the last few years, and like sort of like the indigenous ways of relating to the land around us. And I think that relationship is sort of best exemplified in plants. And I think this is also why, like, you see a lot of both contemporary and medieval occultists like so into botanicals and so into their properties, and not just in the biomedical terms, but also in maybe the biospiritual terms.
Right.
Yeah, I think of something like Agrippa and his books of occult philosophy. I mean, there's just whole sections dealing with minerals and plants. And you're like, what does this got to do with magic? But
Yeah.
clearly it does.
The elements, salt.
Yeah. And again, I think the idea there is, as Jen was saying, that these tools, the robes and the implements and all of that, isn't necessary to get into these states of consciousness. And with practice, one can do without those things. I think it's more of the idea that these are facilitators.
Right.
They help you get there.
Well, and that's the idea of Aldous Huxley with the doors of consciousness. He talks about you have to facilitate being able to open these doors, but once the doors are open, then they maintain, that passageway. It's just a matter of learning the psychology of how to take your brain to the point of being able to enter into those states.
Sorry, I'm just going to say one more thing.
Yeah.
What you're saying is really interesting, Robbie, and also Dr. Kaczynski, because it really, I know that you were saying, I think pre-recording, that you would teach classes on Toltec and in pop culture. And I have a co-host from the Grey Lodge, Matt Murrah, who's been on the show a couple times. He talks about pop Kabbalah. I call it K-pop, with obviously parentheses around it.
You ever K-pop?
That's great.
Right. And so there's so much of, if you want to call it Kabbalah or you want to call it like magical coding in popular culture, like it's just saturated, like the colors, the sounds, the densities, the, everything, the archetypes, it's all there. And so I feel like in a strange way, we're at a precipice where people's consciousness are strangely both prepared and perhaps very aggregated both at the same time, but they're prepared to sort of have higher experiences, but maybe they cannot, for their own reasons, recognize what those experiences really are.
Right.
So I don't know, just an interesting idea. I just thought I'd throw out there.
Yeah, now, as far as pop Kabbalah goes, one thing I'm kind of excited about is I'm, again, from childhood, just a comic book nerd. I don't read so much these days, but when I was a kid, I read like everything. But in December, Marvel Comics is launching this mini series about the character Wiccan, who is one of the children of the Scarlet Witch in the Marvel Comics. And the first issue, one of the variant covers, has the guy in like a superhero outfit that's kind of reminiscent of the 70s, but emblazoned across his chest is the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. And I'm just like, I've got to pick this up.
There's got to be some stuff in here for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to say in regard to Jen talking about people, their mental faculties are at the point where they're ready to experience these higher elevated forms of consciousness. It kind of makes me think of all these kids going to see Taylor Swift and having these ecstatic experiences while they're there. And then when they leave, they lose their memory. Which is,
I actually talk about that in the book.
Yeah. So...
That's wild, dude.
Yeah, they're calling it like post-concert amnesia.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But they're going into states of consciousness that they haven't experienced before, and they're having these, higher form, ecstatic kind of, feelings, and then when they leave, they just tabula, it just is wiped because I don't know, maybe they didn't enter like knowingly. They entered accidentally, and therefore they don't have the tool to maintain the facility, something along those lines.
Yeah, that's really an interesting take on that too, because when I've heard people on the radio talking about this phenomenon, because it was just like all over pop culture, during the Eras tour, and the experts on the radio are like, well, if you're like at a concert and you're focused on, taking selfies or shooting video, you're not really in the moment. You're not actually present. And to the extent to which that is true, I would agree that any spiritual work you are doing does require you being present in the moment. And whether that's an overwhelming moment, like being at a Taylor Swift concert, or just, saying words over your meal before you eat the food, I mean, if you have a practice where you say words over a meal and then you just kind of inhale your McDonald's French fries and you don't really think about it, you're not really present. You're just kind of on autopilot. And to get the most out of that experience, you want to immerse yourself in it. If you're going to say words over food, then you should pause and enjoy the taste of that food, once you're done. And same thing with Taylor Swift. If you're going to go to a concert, whoever you're seeing, Taylor Swift, Metallica, whatever, go all in, I mean, absorb that experience, be present, be there in the moment.
That's funny. That's interesting. Thank you. It's wild that you happen to even have an idea on that. Interesting. I know in your book, did you happen to get into the psychology of initiation and stuff?
Yes. I got a whole chapter on initiation.
I don't know I know you listen, you want people to read the book and pick it up. So if anything you want to talk about that you don't mind, a little teaser on that, maybe.
Well, I think with most initiation ceremonies. The idea is, the person going through it is going through some sort of a, dramatic sort of reenactment or a sacred drama of some sort. And they're playing a part in this experience. And there are various things that happen to a person psychologically when they're going through an initiation. One of these is this whole fight or flight response, or which has various other components added onto it, friend or tend and befriend and things like that. But being in this sort of physiologically and psychologically aroused state makes you very receptive to the information around you, because you're trying to evaluate your situation for, is this safe? Am I in danger? And while in an initiation, you're really not in any danger. You're still going to be anxious and nervous about it, but that also puts you in this very attentive and receptive state of mind where the sorts of lessons that are often part of initiation are able to be communicated more effectively. And that, if you're in a tradition, like a Masonic sort of thing where you're taking oaths, and you're doing this in front of your comrades, you're not just saying something to yourself like your New Year's resolution, which you can just kind of blow off after a couple of weeks. You've now made a statement in front of other people. And so that aspect of it as well, of publicly stating something, also has this effect on you that can be connected to various, again, psychological phenomenon, that you want your behavior to match what you've said. And that's a great way of creating behavior change, which again results in that interior sort of change, which is the goal of initiation. So yeah, there's a whole lot I could say about this. I could spend the entire hour just talking about that, but that's kind of the big overview of it.
It's interesting. I think a way I want to try to explain this, but I don't want to put you on the spot either. Let's say in an initiation, if somehow certain things parts of your body might be touched or slapped, that's near a chakra. Could that start maybe affecting your experience during the situation, the initiation?
Potentially. I think that's one of those things that goes outside the realm of science, because I don't know that most scientists would recognize the idea of a chakra.
Yeah.
But certainly in our East meets West sort of fusion of of esoteric thinking, of magical thinking, that those sorts of ideas of chakras and kundalini and so on have been connected with magical practice. So to the extent to which the chakras actually exist, then these rituals or practice, individual practices, certainly have that potential to trigger or invoke those energies.
Yeah.
Would it be similar to the muscle mind connection? Like you spoke about athletes, and when athletes train, they train with certain music. They put on certain socks, especially the baseball players are very what is it called? Vicious, that they will wear the same socks over and over and over. End of achieving the World Series.
They'll stick their friends out in the locker room over those things.
Right, but you kind of glimpse into with some of these documentaries of some of these accomplished athletes, in that they get into the same exact, they eat the same thing, they wake up at the same time, they wear the same outfit, they place themselves in the same position of a room, and then they go through the entire training over and over and over, and it's almost like while they're working on their craft, it's a ritual itself, and they have the same garb, they have the same music, they have the same whatever it is, and it's almost ritualistic. And when you're talking about if you hit a certain area, it's almost like the mind muscle connection, and that if you're working on the bicep, you're thinking bicep grow, like I'm feeling the contraction, I'm feeling the tearing. They have seen in studies where when you have that mind muscle connection, that the actual muscle will respond and grow. You have more hypertrophy than in others that did not form muscle mind connection. And then with the ritual itself, it's almost like whether it is the color or it is the garments or whatever, I think the ritual itself is like affirming to our consciousness that you're like not only pursuing it physically, but you're pursuing it spiritually. And it's that connection of no longer mind soul, but the connection of mind soul. And you're bridging that gap. And you, like with the Taylor Swift, it's almost like I don't remember it, but maybe because you were not here, like you had transcended all you was in complete agreement. Your mind, muscle, I'm sorry, not muscle, your mind, soul, and body were in agreement for the first time, and you've transcended into your higher realm. Everything you said just connected right now when you said that. So.
Yeah, I kind of remember a book by W.E. Butler called The Magician is Training in Work. And this is what I read very early on in my studies. And one recommendation that he has is that you should have a special ring that you put on only when you're doing magic. That when you put this ring on, you try and enter that sort of identity or that state of mind of I am now I'm now a magician. And you take it off like, oh, I am just me. Now I'm a magician, and but I think it's tying into a lot of those things that you're saying, the idea that you're making these associations that when you put on that ring, when you put on your magic socks, or whatever, that you're entering that you're recalling that muscle memory, that state of mind. And you're absolutely right. It is kind of a ritual. And as I mentioned earlier, we're training for athletes to get into that flow state. Again, the very similar sort of thing. It's taking advantage of all those associations and basically trying to create this ritual, literally a ritual that athletes can go through to help them get into that state of mind because of like forming those associations.
What's really interesting as you guys were talking about this, Richard, I don't know if this was something that you have done in the past. I've done it a few times, many moons ago, where it's almost like kind of like taking on the God form. Like if I'm working with like Toth or Tahuti, maybe at some point I'll meditate and try to like take on the idea of Tahuti, and almost like, or it's just like or in some way it's like we're the star in our video right now that's going on in our head, like I'm Rocky right now, you know what I'm saying? And then you start to take on this role of this image that you want to portray, and it's going to get you what you want to need. And it's kind of like, I'm thinking like taking on the God form sometimes when you're working with certain entities. It's almost like, was there a layer? I don't know.
And you see, go ahead, Richard.
Oh, I was just going to say that there is, again, a lot of psychology around role play. And again, it runs a gamut, and I talk about this also in the book, that role play has been used with children to combat racism, but also there's a lot of interesting phenomenon about role play amongst actors, and how getting into their character and whether they speak about their character in the first person versus the third person speaks to their identification. There's great interview with the star Blue Velvet, where she kind of talks about how even when they're doing like a table reading of the script, just kind of sitting around, we're kind of reading the script, that she had to have the fingernail polish on, that she had to be able to look down at her hands and see that fingernail polish of the character in order to actually inhabit that role and do the table reading. And again, it's not necessarily magic, but it kind of is, and it certainly dovetails into the sorts of things we're talking about.
Well, and I was going to mention there's a whole school of actors that they, as far as the meditation, they become that person, and then they maintain that personification through the entire shooting, even when they're not on set.
Right.
You know, so this is a form of magic as well, as far as, taking, like you were talking about, taking on the God form, taking on these different personifications that actually, change the consciousness and manifest different realities and basically precipitate magical function.
Absolutely. And I know there's sometimes, again, I don't really make a big study of this in the book, but anecdotally, there have been actors who have had like a hard time getting like out of character after they've kind of immersed themselves in it for a while. And maybe a banishing ritual would be helpful or something. We got some tools in the Magick toolkit that could help with that.
Yeah, I think I even heard a story of like Joaquin Phoenix, like what he put himself through to play that Joker role. It was like ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you hear some actors
losing weight and all that stuff.
Yeah. And like some of the most biggest roles or most well-known things, it's like that actor actually took on that character months prior for the movie.
Right.
If you look into like how much they put into it, it's like
Jim
wow,
Carrey.
why it was so good.
Yeah, but in so many things, even actors have to like undergo weeks and months of physical training, martial arts, sword fighting, whatever, to do the roles that they're portraying. I mean, it's you don't just walk into the set and do these things. There's lots of prep.
Yeah. Is there anything else in the book that you would like to maybe mention or touch on that's in there to entice people or anything? Give them a better idea, like maybe just even some of the chapter names or anything. Just let people know what's up with it.
Gosh.
Let's put you on the spot. He's like,
yeah, I kind of feel like we really touch on a lot of the stuff.
I know. I just showed out.
And I was like, oh, I talked about that. Oh yeah, I talked about that too.
Sorry.
But just I can read you the table of contents. Sure. We've got Head Like a Whole, the psychology of connecting the dots and seeing the big picture. Rigmarole models, daily magical practices. So kind of what I do here as I progress from like the starting place, taking on like some sort of magic, a regular daily or just a regular in some other way practice, and then kind of advancing from there into more involved practices. So in addition to the daily magical practice, there's a separate chapter called Think Better, the Magic of Yoga and Meditation. There's a lot of literature on that. And I get into the idea of greater and lesser magical retirements. This is when you sequester yourself to try and prepare yourself to do a larger, a more ambitious undertaking than just your daily sort of practice. Hold that thought, ritual implements, as we talked about earlier. Sacred headspace, temples, and what we do in them. So that kind of gets into the psychology of the space in which we do magic. Significant others, encountering the divine, invocation, evocation, and similar sorts of things. Full circle group ritual, because once, the getting together with other people and doing magic is a natural next step for a lot of people. Then there's initiation, changing your mind. We touched on that. And then the method of science and you. So how you can actually apply the scientific method to critically evaluating whether your work is doing what you think it is.
Very nice. That's a lot. Well, thank you for reading off the chapters. That's awesome. There was one thing you mentioned, and I meant to mention it before, and the thought lost me. We were talking, or something was brought up about rituals, and you just mentioned something about meditation. I think at one point I had even seen James Wasserman even say that rituals could even be like a physical meditation in a certain way. But besides that, maybe before we wrap it up, I think even David Shoemaker said it like this one time in his Living Thelema, or when I think he suggests like a regiment for magicians. It does not sound exciting or crazy, but you're gonna have to learn to meditate. It may sound boring. Just like, damn, I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound fun. But I do think, in my opinion, I think meditation is the key part of it. Do you think, could you maybe add a little bit more on how important you think meditation is within having maybe magical experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best example I could give to address that question is when Aleister Crowley was writing his book 4, his magnum opus on doing magic. first part, or book one, of the 4 parts, was dedicated to yoga. And it was part 2 that he actually gets into the magical implements and actually doing ritual. So I think the fact that he put yoga first says it all. I mean, that the disciplines of, the 8 limbs of yoga are baked into at least Crowley's system. But, with the advent of the Theosophical Society and so on, kind of promoting a lot of these Eastern thoughts, that's also kind of worked its way into the Golden Dawn and a lot of other traditions. And to the extent to which magic is meant to kind of evolve us and to make us into the best version of ourselves, those tools of meditation, of being able to calm your mind, still your mind, introspect, and even attain to these states of, dhyana and samadhi are key. It's like, we're talking earlier about, Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception. It's like, well, yeah, you take one hit and you see the path, but these other techniques, you can get there through meditation. And
Right.
similarly, if once you see that path and you've had those glimpses of samadhi, you know where to find it. You know what you're looking for, what you're shooting for, and that will make you a more effective magician.
Very, very well said, Richard. Beautifully said. Thank you very much for that little bit on meditation. It was an amazing guest, for real, Richard. I'm really glad I finally got you on. Yeah, would love to get you back on in the future if we ever could.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, no, this was like really fun. It was great to have a conversation with you. Before we wrap this up, I will let the other rejects plug themselves again and let everybody know where they can find their work. Lisa, please, Occult Reject Mad Scientist. Let everybody know what's up with you.
Dr. Kaczynski, this was an amazing lecture. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your research, your insights on this, and entertaining our questions. I very much enjoyed the discussion, and as well with Robbie and Jen. That's always fun to hear their take on things as well. Thank you, Nick, for inviting me on. And the only thing I'd like to plug is occultresearchinstitute.org. Some of our fellow rejects have contributed literarily to the site. If you'd like to consume that content that way, please check us out on occultresearchinstitute.org.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I really appreciate you coming on and contributing. And we got my man, Jin the Ninja. What is going on, sir?
Thank you so much. And thank you to Dr. Kaczynski for, tolerating my questions and inquiries into this. And as not a Telemite, but very interested in it, of course. If you want to follow me on Twitter, X at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn, at Threshold Saints on IG and Twitter, as well as thetruegraylodge.com with a V. And tonight we are doing Friday Night Gnostic Book Club, Night Side of Eden. So we'll be discussing it. And my favorite, obviously Nick likes to tease me, but my favorite I guess he's a Telemite too, but Frater Achad. So we'll be discussing a little bit about that tonight because it comes up in the book right away. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate you coming on, sir. It's always great to have you. And finally, we got Robbie Marks. What is going on, sir? Oh, you're muted again, my man. Sorry
about that. Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody. Thank you, Richard, for your time. I really appreciate it. And it's always such a good group as far as the different insight we have from our different perspectives. If anybody wants to check out my work, you can go to my link tree, which is RMARX, and that'll pull up everything for you. And yeah, thanks for everything, Nick. Thanks for bringing this all together.
Well, yeah, no, thank you. I had it again. This was a great discussion. And real quick, again, Richard, please let everybody know where they can find your stuff and your books.
All right. Well, again, thank you all for this amazing conversation. It was a great deal of fun. And if you want to keep up on what I'm doing, you can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. And I also have a website at richard-kaczynski.com. Just take my name there in the screen and I had to put a hyphen there. And if you enjoyed the conversation, do pick up Mind Over Magic, coming out October 7th.
Awesome. Yes. Yes, and that is, I guess, the end of another Occult Rejects. Thank you, everybody in the chat. That's what's up. I really appreciate it. I know it was a little early, but we had some of the regulars here, and they're here from the beginning to the end. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate all your comments. That's why we go live. And until the next one, everybody be well.